Murder in a quiet Texas town. The quiet night that shattered a Texas town. Nestled in the vast expanse of rural Texas, the small town of Birchwood was a sanctuary. With a tiny population just shy of 4,000, it thrived on simplicity. Everyone knew each other, doors remained unlocked, and the loudest noises at night were the occasional howling of coyotes. But all that changed on a quiet October evening. Birchwood would never sleep peacefully again. The Roberts family had lived on the edge of town for generations. Thomas Roberts, a respected local carpenter, had just finished repairing benches for the church's Sunday service. His wife Sarah was the most beloved baker at Birchwood's annual pie contest, and their 3 children may as well have been painted into the idyllic imagery of small-town America. But that Wednesday night, something unspeakable happened. The discovery. At 7:45 a.m. Thursday morning, Julie Thornton, one of the Roberts' neighbors, walked over to their house, delivering a basket of freshly baked muffins. The knock on the door went unanswered. Odd, she thought. The family had always been early risers, with Thomas heading to work by dawn. Julie's polite tapping turned into banging after she noticed their truck still in the driveway. Once inside, a smell Julie would never forget hit her like a tidal wave. In the living room she saw them. The family, all 5 members, were sprawled out, lifeless, blood pooled under their bodies, streaking the wooden floor in macabre patterns. The mother's face was frozen in terror. The father's body lay as if he'd tried reaching for something, or someone, before succumbing. But the eeriest clue came in the form of smeared red letters on one wall, written in what appeared to be blood. "Justice will rise." Julie stumbled back, her scream reverberating across the quiet town. The investigation begins soon. The Birchwood house was crawling with state cops and FBI agents flown in from Dallas. This wasn't just a random act of violence, this was deliberate. Agent Laura Blake, a steely investigator with years of experience tracking serial offenders, looked over the carnage and whispered to herself, "This isn't random, this is personal." The first question was, how did the killer get in? There were no signs of forced entry. Had the family let someone they knew into the house? Or did the perpetrator know the layout well enough to sneak in unnoticed? And then, there was the bloody text on the wall. What did "Justice will rise" mean? Was this a vendetta, or some deranged philosophy the killer held dear? Was the Roberts family targeted as part of a personal grudge? Or were they simply the first victims in what could be a larger, terrifying message to the world? A town in fear. The news spread faster than wildfire. By noon, nearly everyone in Birchwood was gathered outside the Roberts home, faces pale, whispers nervous. How could such horror arrive here in their safe little bubble? Pastor Higgins tried to console the crowd, his soft voice trembling beneath a thin veneer of calm. "Evil can strike anywhere," he said, gripping his Bible tightly. "But we must not let fear consume us." Still, fear was already tightening its grip. Families began locking their doors for the first time in years. Children were forbidden to play outside past sundown. Even the nightly sound of coyotes seemed more ominous, as if carrying whispers of danger. Suspects and dead ends. The Roberts family led quiet lives. No known enemies, no debts, no scandals. Yet, as the police began piecing together their lives, dark undercurrents surfaced. Rumors swirled about Thomas's involvement in a property dispute with Joe Tucker, the wealthiest man in town and owner of multiple farmlands. Joe had been pressuring Thomas to sell a small plot of land on the outskirts of his property. Thomas had steadfastly refused. Was Joe Tucker angry enough to hire someone to do the unthinkable? Then there was Sarah's co-worker at the bakery, Linda Graves. Linda's awkward demeanor and strange obsession with Thomas's wife had always raised eyebrows, but no one ever took her seriously. Maybe she snapped, a neighbor suggested. Despite compelling theories, interviews led to dead ends. Joe Tucker had an ironclad alibi, dining with investors in Dallas. Linda, as it turned out, was hospitalized the night of the murders for a panic attack, the result of her pet cat disappearing. Whatever trail law enforcement thought they had, it kept going ice cold. Secrets unravel. 3 days later, Laura Blake's team stumbled upon a breaking discovery. A security camera 1 mile from the Roberts home had captured footage of a black truck speeding away around midnight. The license plates were tampered with, but the outline of a sticker in the rear window caught Agent Blake's attention. A faded logo for a now-defunct auto repair shop just outside of Austin. A move to Austin led Blake to a retired mechanic named Ricky Dowd. His face turned pale the moment police showed him the footage. "That truck belongs to Mike Durkin," he said. "He used to work for me before I had to lay him off. Good kid at first, but things turned ugly." The Chase Mike Durkin's past was checkered with minor crimes, breaking and entering, petty theft, but nothing on the scale of what happened in Birchwood. According to records, Mike had a long-standing grudge against Thomas Roberts. Years earlier, Thomas accidentally reported Mike, who'd been attempting to steal power tools from a local hardware store. Though Mike managed to avoid jail, he lost his job and spiraled into a life of anger and resentment. When police raided Mike's cabin, hidden deep in the Texan woods, they found a blood-stained jacket and a rifle. Tucked beneath a floorboard was a worn notebook filled with sketches and cryptic phrases like, "Justice is revenge disguised in shadows." Mike was gone, but all signs pointed to him as the killer. The FBI issued a nationwide manhunt. Final hours. A week later, Durkin was arrested in a rundown motel outside El Paso. When questioned, all he said was, "I did what had to be done. Justice isn't served with words." Yet the blood-stained mystery didn't end there. What did really motivate Mike Durkin? And why were the words, "Justice will rise," written in blood, as if warning of something bigger to come? Birchwood may have found its suspect, but the chilling message on the wall lingers, an unsolved puzzle looming over the once quiet town. The serial killings of the Demon Mask Killer. The reign of terror in Los Angeles. The Demon Mask Killer Los Angeles is a city of contrasts, a skyline glittering with wealth and promise, but beneath, its dark alleys tell a different story. In the fall of 1997, something more terrifying than the usual whispers of crime began to haunt the affluent neighborhoods of Beverly Hills and Brentwood. A killer, masked and meticulous, was on the loose, leaving traces of his malevolence in homes that once felt untouchable. The media quickly named him the Demon Mask Killer, owing to the grotesque mask he wore while committing his heinous acts. The pattern emerges. The first murder occurred on a balmy September evening. John and Caroline Myers, a wealthy hedge fund manager and an interior designer, were found brutally murdered in their sprawling Beverly Hills mansion. Caroline had been stabbed multiple times, her hands bound behind her back, while John was found with a bullet wound in the head, slumped in front of his desk. The crime scene held one chilling detail: the mask. A hideous, hand-carved wooden mask resembling a demon was left propped upright next to Caroline's body. Alongside it, detectives discovered a note scrawled in jagged handwriting: "Forsaken by wealth, cleansed by blood." "What the hell does that mean?" Detective Roy Calder muttered as he surveyed the scene. Calder, a grizzled veteran of the LAPD, had seen his fair share of horror over the years, but this was something else. Initially, the Myers case seemed like an isolated attack, but 2 weeks later, another prominent family, the Wilsons, was similarly targeted. Murdered in their sleep, their home showed no signs of forced entry. The mask was there again, grotesque and unmoving, this time perched on the kitchen counter. Another note was left behind: "Your fortune cannot shield you from fate." The LAPD was now on high alert. "This isn't random," Calder growled during a late-night meeting at the precinct. "This guy, whoever the hell he is, he's got a message. And he's making damn sure we hear it." A city on edge. As news of the killings spread, panic gripped Los Angeles. Gated communities reinforced their security systems, and private guards popped up on every corner near luxury homes. "Nobody is safe," blared a headline from the Los Angeles Times. The city's wealthy elite began hiring bodyguards and installing state-of-the-art alarms. Local talk shows buzzed with theories. Was the Demon Mask Killer targeting the rich out of jealousy? Was this some sort of deranged social justice statement? Or was something more personal at play? Calder had suspicions of his own. He's too careful. No fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses. And getting into these houses? He either knows these people, or he's one hell of a professional. As weeks stretched into months, the body count climbed. The targets varied: an elderly widow on the city's west side, a prominent art gallery owner in downtown LA, but the mask and the message always remained: the breakthrough. By December, the FBI had joined the hunt. Agent Barbara Whitman was assigned to work alongside Calder, bringing in her expertise with profiling serial offenders. "He's not just killing for the thrill," Whitman explained during one of their briefings. "The mask is symbolic, the messages are carefully constructed, this is all part of his ritual." "Yeah, well, his ritual is leaving us with a whole lot of dead bodies," Calder snapped, his frustration boiling over. Then came the break they needed. After a fourth family, the Langleys, were found dead in their Pacific Palisades home, investigators uncovered a critical piece of evidence: a small muddy footprint by the back door. With no record of forced entry in any of the murders, Whitman pieced together a theory. He's getting inside their homes before he kills, he's breaking in and waiting. This guy doesn't care how long it takes. He's a predator. Surveillance footage from a neighboring house showed a shadowy figure scoping out the Langley residence days before the murder. The figure wore a hoodie and gloves, but in one frame, a faint scar along his neck could be seen. Cross-referencing the evidence led them to a man named William "Billy" Hargrave. Hargrave was a former security contractor with a history of mental health issues and a deep resentment toward his wealthy clientele. The hunt for Hargrave, Calder, and Whitman raced against the clock to locate Hargrave. His home in Eagle Rock was deserted, but inside, investigators found an unsettling collection of writings and artifacts, sketches of the masks, newspaper clippings of his murders, and a manifesto titled "The Cleansing of the Veil." "What's with these guys and their damn manifestos?" Calder grumbled as he flipped through the pages. Hargrave's writings detailed his hatred for the wealthy, and his belief that their privilege had corrupted society. "Wealth is the parent of all sin," one passage read. But perhaps most chilling was a list of names. 20 of them, all prominent figures in Los Angeles. 5 had already been crossed off. The final showdown. The FBI tracked Hargrave to an abandoned industrial warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Inside, they found evidence suggesting he was preparing for his next kill. "He's not done," Whitman said. "He's escalating." A tactical team moved in, and the standoff that followed was brief but brutal. Hargrave, clutching a shotgun and wearing the demon mask, fired at officers before being taken down by Calder himself. As they approached Hargrave's body, Whitman crouched beside the mask. "Why the mask?" she said aloud, more to herself than anyone else. "It gives him power," Calder replied, wiping the sweat and blood from his brow. Or at least he thought it did. The aftermath. The killing stopped, but questions remained. Why those specific families, and were there accomplices? In the months that followed, Hargrave's manifesto was picked apart by criminologists, psychologists, and journalists. For the people of Los Angeles, the Demon Mask Killer remained a chilling reminder that even in the most glamorous corners of the world, darkness can lurk behind the veneer of wealth and privilege. And for Calder, it was another case that would haunt him long after the headlines faded. "We got him," he told Whitman over a late-night drink after the case was closed. "But damn if I'll ever understand how someone gets that twisted." Whitman stared at her glass, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "The scariest part," she said, "for every one of him we catch there's probably 10 more out there waiting." Reflection, the demon mask. Killer left an indelible scar on the city of Los Angeles. His crimes, rooted in resentment and delusion, became a morbid legend, the kind whispered about in true crime podcasts and late-night documentaries. But for those who lived through it, the scars were permanent. Behind every mask lies a story, and sometimes, the real terror comes from what the mask hides. A crime of passion in Orlando, Florida, a city known for its bright lights, theme parks, and family vacations, had its sunny veneer shattered by a crime so brutal that it tore through neighborhoods like a hurricane. What began as a storm of jealousy culminated in one of the darkest, most horrifying acts of domestic violence in state history. It all started with the discovery of betrayal, but what would follow was far more sinister. The perfect suburban picture cracks. Kyle Bennett was the kind of neighbor everyone loved. A respected firefighter, he was the picture-perfect husband and father. Carol, his wife of 10 years, stayed busy raising their 6-year-old daughter Lily, and working part-time at a local real estate office. On the surface, the Bennetts were like so many other middle-class families living in their quiet suburban Orlando cul-de-sac. Friends described them as happy, grounded, and good people. But appearances deceive, and no one, not even their closest friends, could have anticipated how quickly their lives would unravel. It began innocently enough. Carol started arriving home later than usual, citing extended office hours or last-minute showings. At first, Kyle didn't think much of it, attributing it to her growing workload, but as the weeks went by, her behavior became harder to ignore. She seemed distant, her once enthusiastic demeanor now clouded by distraction. Then, one fateful day, Kyle stumbled across it, a single damning text message on Carol's phone. "Can't wait to see you tonight, babe. Same time?" It was sent by someone Kyle didn't recognize, Greg Dawson, a man from her office. His stomach knotted as reality set in. Kyle, a man used to keeping his cool under pressure, suddenly found himself spiraling. His nightly shifts at the fire department now transformed into sleepless, obsessive hours spent tracking Carol's movements. He knew he should confront her, but a dark anger, an unfamiliar, haunting presence, held him back. The confrontation begins Tuesday evening, January 14, 2019. Kyle broke his silence. As he sat across from Carol at their dinner table, Lily playing in the background, he forced the words out. "Who's Greg?" For a moment Carol froze. She stammered, clutched her wine glass, and insisted Greg was just a co-worker, but Kyle wasn't buying it. "Don't lie to me, Carol, I've seen the texts." The discussion escalated into a shouting match, Lily now tearfully clutching her stuffed rabbit and creeping away to her room. Carol finally confessed after an hour of Kyle's relentless questioning, but she framed the affair as a mistake, swearing it was over. But for Kyle, that wasn't enough. The betrayal had already ignited something buried deep, a rage that he would struggle to contain. A plan takes shape. The following weeks were tense. Carol moved in with her sister, leaving Kyle alone in their house. On the surface, Kyle seemed to be brushing it all off. Friends noted he was quieter but kept up his work obligations and maintained a seemingly stable presence for their daughter. What no one saw was Kyle's transformation. Alone in the house, he quietly stalked Greg Dawson's social media. He followed Carol, sometimes discreetly, sometimes not. It wasn't unhinged, aggressive behavior others might notice. It was quiet, calculated obsession, and it was building to a boiling point. By mid-February, Kyle's focus had shifted. The humiliation burned like acid in his chest. His "we were a family" mantra turned into "she destroyed everything." Somewhere along the way, his growing obsession turned deadly. Kyle's hatred wasn't reserved solely for Greg, it extended to Carol and anyone associated with her betrayal. In his unraveling mind, they all had to pay. The night of wrath. On the night of February 20th, Kyle drove his black truck to Greg Dawson's rental home in Sanford, Florida. Armed with duct tape, a firearm, and a long-handled hunting knife, Kyle wasn't just planning an impulsive crime, he had meticulously laid out every move. Knocking on the door at approximately 9:45 p.m., Kyle introduced himself with fake pleasantries. "I'm Carol's husband. Let's talk." Greg, taken aback, cautiously let him in. Witnesses later described Greg as a man with little history in confrontations, a soft-spoken numbers guy. He had no reason to expect what would happen. The conversation rapidly escalated. Greg, outmaneuvered and taken by surprise, was subdued within 10 minutes. Bleeding and disoriented, he barely found the words to beg before Kyle drove his knife clean into his side one final time. But Kyle wasn't done. The next phase of his plan was even darker. Greg was just one piece of his vendetta, a family dragged into horror. Carol, meanwhile, was spending the night at her sister's house. She didn't know Kyle had been following her for days, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. After leaving Greg's home, Kyle drove directly to her sister's suburban home, knowing full well that Carol, their daughter Lily, and Carol's sister would all be inside. At 11 p.m., neighbors reported the sound of shattering glass and screams. Kyle's sudden burst into the home startled Carol's sister, who was the first to meet her tragic end. Firing off 2 rounds from his handgun, Kyle walked toward Carol with a grim calmness. "You couldn't leave things alone, could you?" he muttered. Carol grabbed Lily and attempted to flee, but Kyle already anticipated it. The gunshots echoed through the neighborhood as terror unfolded. The aftermath. By the time police arrived at 11:33 p.m., 3 people were dead: Greg Dawson, Carol's sister, and Carol herself. Lily, miraculously unharmed, was found hidden inside a kitchen pantry, trembling. Kyle, sitting calmly on the front porch, surrendered without resistance. "It's over," he told the approaching officers, his words cold and detached. His chilling composure stunned investigators. Despite clear evidence of premeditation, Kyle claimed his actions were the only way to make things right. He refused to show remorse or cooperate with mental health evaluations. The trial and legacy. In the months that followed, Kyle's trial became one of the most publicized criminal cases Florida had ever seen. His defense team attempted to argue for temporary insanity, but prosecutors painted Kyle as a cold-blooded killer, fueled by ego and rage. Ultimately, Kyle was convicted on all counts and handed a life sentence without the possibility of parole. But the case left behind more than just a guilty verdict. It left a community rattled. Residents of Sanford and Orlando were forced to ask hard questions about jealousy, rage, and the fragility of the human mind, a lesson in darkness. The Bennett murders, as the press coined them, serve as a haunting reminder of how quickly love can turn to hate. Beneath the sunny skies of Florida's suburban neighborhoods lies the potential for human darkness to fester and grow unchecked. The Highway Slayer of New Jersey. Stretching across the Garden State, New Jersey's vast network of highways is both its lifeline and its shadowy underbelly. From the bustling turnpikes to the quieter rural routes, these roads connect millions of commuters every day. But in the fall of 2005, they became the hunting ground of a killer. A shadowy figure who preyed on unsuspecting drivers in one of the most mysterious and chilling crime sprees to haunt the state. The press would soon dub the unknown assailant the Highway Slayer. The first victim, a sudden nightmare. It all began late one October night on a desolate stretch of Route 17. Melissa Harding, a 32-year-old nurse heading home after a double shift, was found slumped over the wheel of her Honda Civic. Her vehicle had veered off the road into a shallow ditch. At first, police believed it was a routine accident, but upon closer inspection, the truth sent shivers through their spines. Melissa had been shot through the temple, execution style. Though the bullet wound was deliberate, there was no evidence of theft or struggle. Her purse lay untouched on the passenger seat, her phone still docked on the dashboard. It was as though someone had pulled up alongside her car, fired a single, precise shot, and disappeared into the night. "This wasn't random," said Sergeant Kevin Slater of the local police department, crouching by the vehicle, his flashlight gleaming on the blood-streaked window. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. But any leads were slim. That stretch of Route 17 was poorly lit, with no surveillance cameras, and the few drivers passing through during those hours hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary. The investigation hit a wall within days. A pattern begins to emerge. Barely 2 weeks later, Brian Caldwell, a long-haul trucker, was found dead inside his truck's cabin along I-80. Like Melissa, he'd been shot through the head. His rig had slowly rolled to a halt on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking eerily in the darkness. Once again, there were no signs of robbery or altercation. By early November, a third victim surfaced, Sandra Miller, a young mother of two, who was on the way to pick up groceries late at night. Her body was discovered in her car near an isolated off-ramp of the New Jersey Turnpike. The scene mirrored the others, a clean, precise, and chilling execution. The randomness of the locations baffled investigators, but one thing was consistent. The killings all occurred on roads without camera coverage, dead zones in the state's otherwise well-watched highway system. "This guy's studying traffic patterns," said Detective Alan Greaves during a press briefing. "He's mapping out blind spots, areas where he knows he can strike without being seen." Fear tightens its grip. As the rumors of a high-speed killer spread, drivers across New Jersey began living in terror. Every gas station became a stop filled with unease. Even harmless glances from another car became suspect. Nighttime traffic on major highways plummeted as people adjusted their schedules to avoid driving after dark. Highway patrol units were doubled, some even stationed at seemingly random stretches of road, but that wasn't enough to stop the killer's growing confidence. One snowy December evening, Robert Haskell, a 39-year-old salesman, became the fourth victim on the Garden State Parkway. This time the killer changed tactics. He fired not one but two bullets, the second tearing through the passenger side window, leaving behind a grisly reminder of just how vulnerable drivers were. "I've covered a lot of cases," said veteran journalist Paula Kent, "but this one is different. It feels like he's taunting us. He knows how to vanish." Newspapers began running headlines like "Death rides the highways" and "Exit at your own risk." Despite the growing fear and heightened media coverage, authorities were no closer to identifying the killer. The one breakthrough. Weeks later, during a frigid January morning, the killer made a mistake. A delivery driver whose route took him along Route 46 had been following a black pickup truck for some time. Something about it felt off, the way it lingered in the slow lane before speeding up and slowing down again. It was erratic, like he didn't know if he wanted to pass or stay back, the driver later told investigators. The next thing he knew, the pickup swerved aggressively and sped ahead. Barely 2 miles further, the driver then saw something horrifying. A sedan pulled over on the shoulder with its driver slumped forward, blood spraying the inside of the windshield. "I knew right away, it was him, it had to be him." Police acted swiftly on this witness account. Forensic teams scoured the area, finally finding a distinctive clue, tire tracks near the shoulder, left by the pickup truck as it accelerated away. For the first time, they had a vehicle profile to go on. The search for a ghost. Using descriptions from the witness and footage from earlier sections of highway camera footage, police narrowed their focus to a dark-colored Ford F-150 with a custom bumper, potentially modified for off-road use. The problem? There were thousands of similar trucks registered across several New Jersey counties. The FBI was brought in to help profile the offender. Agents suggested he was likely a man in his late 30s or early 40s, someone with law enforcement or military experience given the precision of the shots. He thinks of these roads as his stage, Whitman, the lead profiler, explained, and every mile he drives makes him harder to catch. Meanwhile, New Jersey's drivers became hyper-vigilant. Social media exploded with posts urging people to be careful on the unlit stretches of highway. Some even speculated the killer might have a dashboard police scanner, allowing him to avoid patrols when hunting. A fatal slip-up. The turning point came in mid-February, when police discovered a critical piece of evidence, a discarded shell casing found during a sweep near one of the murder sites. Ballistics analysis linked it directly to the same weapon used in the other attacks. Even more importantly, the casing bore partial prints. Those prints belonged to a former Marine sniper named Danny Wexler. Wexler had a history of volatile behavior, multiple altercations with co-workers, a divorce that left him embittered, and most troubling of all, a fascination with firearms that bordered on obsessive. When police raided Wexler's garage in rural Sussex County, they found a disturbing stockpile: firearms, suppressors, modified gear, and a detailed map of New Jersey highways. Routes were marked with X's, highlighting camera blind spots. It was like looking into the mind of madness, one officer later recalled. The end-of-the-road officers didn't find Wexler at home, igniting a statewide manhunt. For days, he remained elusive, until a patrol car spotted his truck parked at a rest stop along I-95. Inside, Wexler calmly sat eating a sandwich, his rifle loaded and resting on the passenger seat. Although the standoff was tense, Wexler ultimately surrendered without firing a shot. When questioned about his crimes, he offered no apology or explanation. All he said was, "The road chose me." The aftermath. Wexler's arrest brought a sense of relief to New Jersey's terrified drivers, but the scars of his killing spree lingered. He confessed to all 7 murders but refused to divulge why he chose his victims, leaving families haunted by unanswered questions. The case became a grim reminder of how vulnerable we are, even on a routine drive home. For the thousands who traverse New Jersey's highways daily, the ghostly presence of the highway slayer will forever linger in their rearview mirrors, a chilling symbol of how the open road can turn deadly in the blink of an eye. The Bloody Mansion in Chicago's North Shore suburbs are known for their tree-lined streets and sprawling mansions, symbols of privilege and peace. But one cold December night on the outskirts of Winnetka, a single mansion became the stage for one of the most brutal crimes the city had ever seen. In a shocking spree of bloodshed, the entire family of an oil tycoon was slaughtered inside their luxurious home. The motive, pure greed. The killer, someone trusted. The media would later call it the Bloody Mansion murders, a crime so sensational and tragic that its echoes still ring through Chicago's elite circles. A family empire on the edge. The Tremont family had it all. James Tremont, 63, was a self-made oil magnate who had clawed his way to the top of Chicago's business elite. With a net worth estimated at $850 million, James ran his empire from the comfort of his stunning lakefront mansion. His wife, Eleanor, 58, was a respected philanthropist who dedicated her time to local charities. They had 3 children: Lucas, 35, the eldest, and the presumed heir to the business; Madeline, 31, an aspiring artist with little interest in corporate matters; and Andrew, 28, the youngest, known for his hard-partying lifestyle and spiraling gambling debts. To the outside world they appeared untouchable, a dynasty of wealth and refinement. But behind closed doors, cracks had begun to form. Family feuds over money and power simmered beneath the surface. James had grown increasingly frustrated with Lucas's management decisions and was reportedly considering cutting him out of the business altogether. Meanwhile, Andrew's financial troubles had begun to tarnish the family's carefully curated image, with rumors swirling about unpaid debts to unsavory characters. Eleanor's attempts to mediate between her children often ended in tearful arguments, and tensions reached a breaking point when James announced plans to change his will, a change that could potentially cut some family members off from the fortune completely. The incident. On the night of December 12, 2018, the Tremont estate hosted what would be its final family dinner. Security footage showed James, Eleanor, and their 3 children entering the sprawling home around 7 p.m. All seemed normal at first, laughter echoing from the dining room, faint strains of classical music from the house's state-of-the-art sound system, but by sunrise, the mansion had fallen eerily silent. At 6:45 a.m. the next morning, Cecilia Alvarez, the family's housekeeper of 15 years, arrived to prepare breakfast. She let herself in with her key but immediately sensed something was wrong. The chandelier in the grand foyer was shattered, shards of crystal scattered across the marble floor, furniture was overturned, and a thick metallic smell hung in the air. Cecilia called out for the family, but received no reply. Trembling, she entered the dining room and dropped the tray she was carrying. The sight that met her eyes was one she would never forget. The crime scene. James Tremont sat slumped in his chair at the head of the long mahogany dining table, his chest riddled with bullet holes. Eleanor's body was sprawled across the floor, her face pale, frozen in shock. Lucas, the eldest son, had been stabbed violently, his body sprawled across an antique sideboard. In the adjoining room, Madeline was discovered with a slit throat, her blood pooling across the Persian rug. Andrew's body lay in the study. Unlike the others, he had been shot execution style, a single bullet to the back of the head. What made the massacre even more chilling was the precision of the killings. There was no sign of forced entry, no apparent robbery, nothing to indicate a random act. Whoever had done this knew the victims well, and the brutality of the murders hinted at an overwhelming personal motive. On the dining table, police discovered a chilling message scrawled in black ink on Eleanor's monogrammed stationery. Blood bears the price of betrayal. The investigation. The murders shocked Chicago to its core. The Tremont name, once synonymous with power and prestige, became synonymous with tragedy. The estate, normally shielded from the public eye by its high stone walls, turned into a media circus. Reporters camped outside for days. Detective Marcus Reed, a seasoned investigator with the Chicago PD, led the case. From the beginning, Reed suspected that this wasn't a typical home invasion. This wasn't about stealing, he told reporters. This was personal, very personal. Reed's first suspicion fell on Andrew. His gambling ties painted a dangerous picture, and investigators initially theorized that a hired hitman had carried out the murders as retribution for unpaid debts. But interviews with Andrew's bookie confirmed that, while he owed money, it wasn't enough to warrant such a slaughter. As the investigation expanded, more family secrets began to unravel. Madeline's personal laptop revealed bitter emails exchanged between herself and Lucas over control of family finances. "You think you're Dad's golden boy," one email read. "He won't protect you forever." A shocking twist. But the case took its darkest turn when Detective Reed uncovered a hidden safe in James's office. Inside were a series of legal documents that had been prepared but never signed. Documents that would have transferred control of the family fortune to Madeline while cutting Lucas and Andrew out entirely. Suddenly the focus shifted. Madeline had been the favorite child, the one James trusted most, despite her lack of interest in the business, but Lucas, who stood to lose everything, became the prime suspect. The breakdown, a family betrayed. Lucas Tremont was brought in for questioning. At first he maintained his innocence, insisting he had left the mansion alive after dinner. But a key piece of evidence sealed his fate. A bloody handprint found on the doorknob of the antique sideboard near his brother's body. The fingerprint was a match. Under intense interrogation, Lucas finally broke. Tearfully, he admitted to orchestrating the murders, citing years of resentment and the looming threat of his father's changed will. "He was going to take it all away," Lucas confessed. "Everything I worked for, everything I deserved. I couldn't let him do that." Lucas insisted that he had hired a hitman and hadn't carried out all the killings himself, but detectives were never able to confirm the existence of an accomplice. The prosecution would later argue that Lucas himself had committed the murders in a fit of rage, unable to bring a stranger into a crime so deeply personal. The trial of a lifetime. Lucas Tremont's trial captivated the nation. The once successful businessman appeared haggard and broken as prosecutors laid out the evidence against him. The chilling crime scene photos, the cryptic note, and Lucas's own damning confession painted a picture of a man consumed by greed and jealousy. In the end, Lucas was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Meanwhile, the Tremont mansion, once a symbol of wealth and grandeur, was left abandoned, its windows boarded up, the scene of the massacre sealed off as a reminder of the darkness that had unfolded there. A legacy of tragedy. To this day, the Bloody Mansion murders serve as a haunting reminder of how family ties can fray under the weight of greed and betrayal. The house itself remains unsold, a hulking reminder of the blood spilled in the pursuit of power. For Chicago, it was more than a murder. It was a public unmasking of the human cost of ambition, and how jealousy, when left unchecked, can destroy even the most charmed lives. Haunted house or murder scheme? In New Orleans, where Gothic architecture and chilling folklore blend seamlessly, it's hard to tell where the tales of the supernatural end and the shadows of reality begin. Among the city's eerie shotgun homes and moss-covered cemeteries, there stands a house, an old creaky Victorian mansion known to locals as the Moore Estate. For decades the house was the subject of whispered rumors. Neighbors told stories of flickering lights, distant screams, and the faint sound of footsteps dragging across the hardwood at midnight. Some claimed it was cursed, a vortex for the spirits of those who perished there in gruesome ways. Others dismissed it as just another relic of New Orleans' spooky history. But in the summer of 2022, the Moore Estate became home to a tragedy so horrific that it would test the boundaries of what was real, what was imagined, and what people could believe in the depths of their souls. A family desperate for a new start. When the Johnson family, Patrick, his wife Laura, and their teenage daughter Evelyn, moved into the Moore Estate, they were looking for a fresh start. Patrick had recently lost his job at a corporate firm in Chicago, and Laura was struggling with the loss of her mother. Their move to New Orleans was meant to be a chance to reset, to leave behind the chaos that had consumed their lives. Patrick was drawn to the Moore Estate for two reasons: its historic charm and its absurdly low price tag. The house was massive, 3 stories tall with wide verandas and stained glass windows. It looked like something out of a Gothic novel, hauntingly beautiful, yet undeniably imposing. Local realtors offered vague explanations for why the price was so low. Some said it was because of how hard it was to maintain an old home like that. Others simply avoided the question, diverting it instead to its unique character. The Johnsons dismissed the rumors of hauntings as frivolous superstitions spread by bored neighbors. Patrick joked, "If it comes with a ghost, we'll charge rent." They moved in the following week. Strange happenings. Almost immediately after settling in, strange things began happening. At first it was small, easy-to-explain occurrences, light bulbs flickering, walls creaking as if shifting under unseen weight, and Evelyn claiming to have heard whispering voices late at night. "It's probably the wind," Patrick insisted. But sometimes wind couldn't explain it. Laura swore she'd left a pile of folded laundry on the table one afternoon, only to come back and find it scattered across the dining room floor. The family dog, Max, refused to step foot inside certain parts of the house, barking ferociously at the staircase leading to the attic. Then came the more disturbing events. Shadows passed behind frosted glass doors when no one was there. A chandelier suddenly crashed to the ground in the middle of dinner, missing Evelyn by inches. One morning Laura woke up to find claw-like scratches along the hardwood floor of their bedroom, scratches that hadn't been there the night before. Tensions in the household began to rise. Patrick, always the skeptic, dismissed it all as coincidence, but Laura was starting to feel uneasy. "I think this house wants us out," she whispered to Patrick one night. "It doesn't feel right." A death in the house. Everything escalated the night Patrick was found dead in the library. It was Evelyn who discovered him. She had gone downstairs during a thunderstorm to retrieve a book for school when she stumbled across her father slumped over his desk, his eyes wide and lifeless. Blood pooled beneath his head. A panicked 911 call brought the police. At first they ruled it a tragic accident. The coroner claimed Patrick had fallen while reaching for the high shelves and struck his head on the corner of the desk, but Laura wasn't convinced. "He wasn't clumsy," she insisted during questioning. And he hated storms. He wouldn't have been reading in there during a storm. Rumors of a haunting exploded. News outlets ran breathless headlines. "Is New Orleans' most haunted house to blame for residents' death?" Tourists began taking pictures outside the Moore Estate's gate, whispering about a killer ghost. But Detective Alan Rourke, the officer assigned to the case, didn't believe in ghosts. A 20-year veteran of the New Orleans police force, Rourke had seen his share of staged deaths, false leads, and ill-fated accidents. Something about Patrick's death didn't sit right with him. Suspicion and deception. When Laura told Rourke about the strange events leading up to Patrick's death, he listened carefully, but he couldn't explain away one important question. If Patrick's death was an accident, why were there bruises on his wrists? Bruises that looked like someone had held him down. The deeper Rourke dug, the darker the story became. He started with the house's history. Records revealed that the Moore Estate had been the site of multiple deaths over the years, stretching back to the early 1900s. 2 children drowned in the backyard pond in 1913. A maid was found hanging in the attic in 1935. In the 1970s, a couple who rented the home for a summer were found dead in their bed, cause of death unknown. But what struck Rourke wasn't just the deaths, it was the connections. Each time someone died in the house, history seemed to forget about it soon after. Newspaper archives were incomplete and police files were mysteriously missing. It was as if the house swallowed stories in the same way it swallowed lives. As Rourke dug into the Johnsons' personal lives, another theory emerged, one more grounded, yet just as sinister, a dark truth uncovered. Laura, it turned out, had divorced her first husband under a cloud of suspicion. He disappeared in 2007, his last known location being their shared vacation home. No charges were ever filed, but relatives had quietly accused Laura of foul play. Evelyn, too, had been in therapy for years, suffering from what doctors described as unresolved trauma related to her parents' relationship. Detective Rourke grew suspicious of Laura's behavior. Could Patrick's death have been meticulously planned, designed to look like an accident, or even a haunting? When the autopsy results finally came in, they revealed something chilling. Patrick's blood contained high levels of sedatives, and the desk corner he supposedly hit wasn't sharp enough to cause the fatal wound to his skull. Someone had staged the scene. The final straw came when Rourke found a series of texts on Laura's phone sent to an unidentified number. One message read, "He'll be out of the picture soon. We'll finally be free." Murder. Disguised as a haunting faced with the mounting evidence, Laura was arrested and charged with Patrick's murder. Under pressure, she confessed, but not without a ghastly twist. Laura claimed that she had killed Patrick, but only because the house had driven her to do it. She described sleepless nights haunted not by guilt but by voices, whispers that told her Patrick was poisoning their family, that he had to be removed. "The house made me see the truth," she declared in court. "It showed me what kind of man he really was." Aftermath. The trial captured national attention, dividing public opinion. Some believed Laura's story, insisting the house was cursed and its influence drove her to madness. Others saw her as a manipulative killer who had exploited local folklore to cover up a cold-blooded crime. The Moore estate was left abandoned once again, its gates locked and its windows boarded. But that didn't stop ghost hunters, true crime enthusiasts, and thrill-seekers from gathering outside on stormy nights, waiting to catch a glimpse of its dark secrets. Night Wolf in rural Montana. Montana's rugged landscapes are a picture of vast tranquility, a realm of towering mountains, dense forests, and endless prairies. It's a place where the stars shine brighter than city lights, and where small, tight-knit communities live seemingly untouched by the chaos of the outside world. But in the spring of 2015, that illusion of safety was shattered by a string of brutal killings that turned the rural countryside into a hunting ground. The predator? A shadowy figure, elusive and relentless, whom locals came to fearfully call the Night Wolf. Detective Ethan Briggs, a retired federal agent with roots in Montana, described the case as one of the darkest stories I've ever encountered. Because in Montana, danger doesn't just knock on your door, it creeps in with the wind and hides under the moonlight. The first killings. The nightmare began in a remote farming town called Red Pines, nestled at the base of the Bitterroot Range. The population was barely over 2,000, and residents knew each other by name, or at least thought they did. One cold April morning, Haley Mathis, a local rancher, discovered a horrifying scene on her property. 2 of her ranch hands, brothers Cal and Jacob Dempsey, were found dead inside the barn. Cal had been shot at point-blank range, while Jacob's throat had been savagely slit. The brutality of the murders stunned investigators and shattered the town's fragile sense of peace. What made the crime even more chilling was the message left behind, a wolf's paw print, smeared in blood on the barn door. Accompanying it was the scrawled message, "The night belongs to the hunter." Locals were horrified. For a place like Red Pines, murder might as well have been an alien concept. A double homicide so gruesome and theatrical? Unthinkable. Sheriff Hank Monroe, a seasoned lawman with years of dealing with cattle rustlers and petty feuds, admitted he was out of his depth. "I've never seen anything like it," he told reporters, his face pale with unease. "This ain't just a murder, this is something worse." A community in fear. The Dempsey murders sparked panic throughout the region. Local families began locking their doors for the first time in decades. Firearms were dusted off and placed by bedsides, and searchlights were rigged outside barns and homes. Still, the killings didn't stop. 2 weeks later, 50 miles away in the small village of Rook's Hollow, another grim discovery was made. Marta Phillips, an older widow living alone in a cabin near the woods, was found brutally slaughtered. Her body had been dragged from her front porch into the surrounding forest, leaving a bloody trail that vanished into the trees. A search team uncovered her remains 2 days later in a shallow grave, flanked by jagged rocks positioned into the shape of a wolf's fang. Marta's death delivered a devastating blow as most community members dismissed the killings as isolated at first. Now, the idea of a methodical killer stalking their region began to take root. Schools shut down indefinitely, and many farmers refused to leave their properties unless armed. Rumors swirled. Some spoke of a drifter who'd passed through in the weeks prior, while others whispered superstitions about a werewolf or shapeshifter roaming under the full moon. The stories only fueled the fear. It wasn't just a killer, it was a hunter. The arrival of Detective Briggs. By the start of June, and following no fewer than 5 chilling murders, the state police called in reinforcement. That's when retired profiler Ethan Briggs was asked to assist. Known for taking on some of the most notorious serial killers of his career, Briggs had left behind a fast-paced federal job for the quieter life in his Montana hometown, but when he was called to consult on the Nightwolf case, it struck too close to home to refuse. "I hated going back into that line of work," Briggs would later admit, "but the people being targeted, they were neighbors, friends. You can't say no in a situation like that." Briggs attended the crime scenes with a steely focus, noting the escalation in the perpetrator's methods, the paw print symbol, the threatening notes, and the theatrical nature of the kills. All of it indicated that the Nightwolf craved more than just blood. He wanted his victims, the police, and the entire community to feel hunted. Pattern of the predator. As Briggs dug through the evidence, a pattern began to emerge. The killer wasn't indiscriminately preying on anyone. They were targeting those connected to a decades-old land fraud scandal, one that had divided the residents of Red Pines years earlier. In the early 1990s, land developers and ranchers had clashed over the government's plan to build a controversial oil pipeline through parts of rural Montana. While some ranchers accepted bribes to sell their properties, others refused to give up ancestral farmlands. The bitterness lingered, splitting families, friendships, and neighborly trust. "One thing about these small towns," Briggs noted, "bad blood doesn't die, sometimes it just goes dormant." Briggs theorized that the Nightwolf was somehow linked to these disputes, seeking revenge for the perceived betrayal and destruction caused all those years ago. But who could carry such a grudge? And why act now, over a decade later? The hunter revealed. Briggs finally got his break on a rainy July evening. Security footage from a gas station just outside White Valley showed a hooded figure filling up an old pickup truck the morning after one of the murders. A closer inspection revealed something chilling: the blurred outline of a wolf decal on the truck's rear window. The truck was traced to one Charlie Deacon, a drifter and former ranch hand who had lived in Red Pines during the height of the land dispute. Interviews with locals described Deacon as quiet, but deeply angry. A man who had lost his family's farm in the pipeline debacle and spent the next 20 years harboring resentment against those he believed betrayed their rural roots. "What's strange about Deacon," Briggs said, "is that he didn't just disappear, he watched, he waited, and he planned." A warrant was issued for Deacon's arrest, but finding him in Montana's vast wilderness was a challenge all its own. Briggs described it as hunting the hunter, comparing Deacon to a wolf in his own right, solitary and elusive, a predator who knew the terrain better than anyone. The final stand. The manhunt culminated in early August when authorities tracked Deacon to an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the Lolo National Forest. The scene that followed was straight out of a nightmare. When officers breached the cabin, they found evidence of ritualistic planning, maps marked with X's over victim locations, a journal filled with ramblings about betrayal and restoring balance, and rows of knives and firearms meticulously laid out. Then came the gunshots. Deacon wasn't going down quietly. He fired at the approaching officers, wounding one and prompting an hours-long standoff. It was Briggs who ultimately convinced Deacon to come out, using raw honesty as his weapon. "It wasn't negotiation," Briggs later said in interviews. "I told him the truth, that he wasn't the wolf he thought he was. He was just a man, a broken man chasing ghosts." Deacon eventually surrendered, but not before whispering chilling words to Briggs, "This isn't over, there are more wolves in the pack." Aftermath. Deacon's arrest brought a temporary sense of relief to the community, but his cryptic parting words haunted investigators. Was he exaggerating, or did he have accomplices? While Deacon confessed to the killings, he never expressed remorse, describing each murder as justice for the land. The court sentenced him to life in prison without parole, but the scars he left behind in rural Montana ran deep. For the families of the victims, the legend of the Nightwolf is one they wish they could forget. But for the surrounding communities, Deacon's name became synonymous with an uncomfortable truth that old wounds never truly heal, and in the remote corners of the wilderness, monsters can thrive unseen. Legacy of the Nightwolf. Though the killings are over, the legend of the Nightwolf refuses to die. Ghost stories about prowling wolves and bloody paw prints still circulate under Montana's starry skies, and the old disputes over land remain like an ember waiting to reignite. The subway killer in New York City. Beneath New York City's glittering skyline lies a labyrinth of tunnels and tracks, a sprawling subway system pumping life through the veins of the city. With over 5 million riders passing through its network every day, it's a world of ceaseless motion, light, and chaos. Yet, hidden in its darker corners, the subway holds secrets, shadows where people disappear, screams go unheard, and something sinister could be lurking just beyond the next train. In the winter of 2011, as temperatures plunged and the city buzzed with holiday chaos, New Yorkers were gripped by terror. A string of mysterious murders began unfolding within the subway, and before long, an elusive and terrifying figure emerged, someone the tabloids would dub the subway killer, a single glove in the night. The first victim, 28-year-old Sarah Delaney, never made it home from work on a frigid December evening. An aspiring artist who worked part-time as a barista in Greenwich Village, Sarah had taken the subway from the West 4th Street station, her usual late commute back to her shared apartment in Queens. When she didn't show up that night, her friends assumed she'd gone to stay with her boyfriend. Her body was discovered 3 days later on an abandoned service track near the Canal Street station. Sarah had been strangled, her coat torn, and her bag left untouched. But what set police officers on edge was the scene itself, a single black glove placed neatly next to her body, as if left deliberately. At first the NYPD chalked it up to a random mugging gone wrong, or the work of a vagrant. But Sarah's well-dressed appearance, coupled with the lack of robbery, didn't fit the narrative. And when the second body was found, it became clear this was no accident. Murder in the shadows. Barely a week after Sarah's death, 35-year-old Eric Walton, a freelance journalist, was found under identical circumstances. His body was discovered in a little-used maintenance corridor that branched off the subway hub at Union Square. Like Sarah, Eric had been strangled, his belongings untouched, and again, a single black glove was found lying eerily beside the body. The glove became the murderer's calling card. NYPD Detective Marcus Cole, a veteran officer with over 20 years on the force, was tasked with leading the case. At first, we thought it was bad luck, straying into the wrong part of the subway, a psychopath targeting the vulnerable, said Cole. But the way it was set up, clean, methodical, it reeked of premeditation. Cole began seeing a clear pattern. Both victims were found in dimly lit, restricted areas of the subway that required specific knowledge of the system. "This killer knows the subway like the back of their hand," Cole remarked during a tense press briefing. "They know where the cameras can't see, they know where to strike and vanish without a trace. Terror on the tracks." As news of the murders spread, the city descended into paranoia. Headlines screamed, "Killer stalks subway passengers," and "Who's next?" Evening ridership plummeted. Fewer people dared to commute alone after dark, while others stuck steadfastly to crowded train platforms, avoiding empty carriages at all costs. "I don't go anywhere past 9 p.m. now," said Helen Brooks, a 45-year-old administrative assistant, nervously clutching her purse in the bustling Times Square station. "I don't care how late I get home, I stay where there are people." But the killer wasn't deterred. Less than 3 weeks after Eric Walton's murder, 22-year-old Brian Rivera, a college student from NYU, became victim number 3. Brian had been riding the N train when he vanished somewhere between the Prince Street and Canal Street stops. His body was found the next morning near Bowery Station on another isolated service track. The signature black glove was there, hauntingly placed next to his outstretched hand. The hunter lurks, unseen. What baffled investigators was the killer's ability to seemingly melt into the subway's vast system. Citywide, subway stations were equipped with over 6,000 cameras, yet not a single image of the killer ever surfaced. And the murders were taking place at eerily precise intervals, as though orchestrated, planned to perfection. We're dealing with someone highly organized, someone who knows escape routes, blind spots, Access points none of the general public would even notice, said Cole during a gritty NYPD interview. The killer's timing also raised suspicions. All 3 prior murders occurred late at night or just before dawn, when the subway system was at its quietest, its emptiest. And without any witnesses, police felt they were chasing a ghost. A chilling lead emerges. Everything changed with the 4th body. Angela Carter, a 41-year-old office manager, was attacked one night near the Brooklyn Bridge City Hall stop. But this time she was alive when first responders found her. Barely conscious and struggling to breathe, Angela had been left for dead near a service staircase after being dragged from the platform. "I saw him," she whispered weakly to Detective Cole from her hospital bed the next morning. "He had keys. Subway. Keys." This revelation electrified investigators. Access to master keys, used by maintenance workers and transit staff to enter restricted areas, meant the killer likely had insider knowledge of the subway system. The NYPD shifted their focus to current and former MTA, Metropolitan Transportation Authority employees, specifically those with disciplinary issues or a history of mental instability. The subway killer unmasked. The breakthrough finally came in February of 2012, when a disgruntled ex-MTA employee named Frank Boyle became the prime suspect. Boyle, a 38-year-old former technician, had been fired a year earlier for erratic behavior and repeated complaints of harassment toward his co-workers. Boyle's behavior had taken a dark turn after his termination. Social media posts revealed his growing obsession with the subway system and how he believed it represented the rotten core of the city. His last known address was a basement apartment in Bushwick, but police found it abandoned. Boyle knew the subway's secrets, its blind spots, the forgotten maintenance tunnels, the spots security cameras couldn't reach. He used his insider knowledge as a weapon, turning the system into his hunting ground. The final showdown. The manhunt culminated in late February when an off-duty transit worker noticed a man matching Boyle's description lurking near the 34th Street Herald Square station, entering a restricted service hatch. A combined NYPD and SWAT team was mobilized, tracking Boyle deep into the system's underbelly, a labyrinth of pitch-black staircases, tunnels, and forgotten passageways. The confrontation was intense. Boyle, armed with a length of pipe and sheer desperation, attempted to evade capture by plunging further into the subway's void. He knew those tunnels like he built them himself, Detective Cole later admitted. The chase lasted several hours, with officers carefully navigating areas where a single wrong step could lead to an oncoming train or a deadly drop. Eventually, Boyle was cornered near an unused maintenance platform miles from public access. He surrendered without a fight, but uttered chilling final words. "The subway chose me. I was its will." Aftermath: Boyle confessed to 5 murders during his interrogation, though police suspected he was responsible for more. The chilling detail that emerged, however, was his motive. Boyle believed he was purging the subway of people he viewed as corrupting it, city dwellers who symbolized urban decay. His victims were chosen at random, based solely on opportunity. Sentenced to life in prison without parole, Boyle remained unrepentant, refusing all psychological evaluations and denying his crimes were due to mental illness. "This wasn't madness," said Cole. "This was obsession, pure and simple. Legacy of fear." Though Boyle was caught, the subway killer's reign of terror left an indelible mark on New York City. Riders became warier, the MTA expanded its security measures, and the once overlooked shadows of the subway now seemed darker, more threatening. A father's revenge in Seattle. The rain never stops in Seattle. It cascades endlessly down darkened windows, pools and potholes, and soaks the clothes of every unlucky soul who forgot an umbrella. But for one man, that persistent rain became the soundtrack of his darkest days. A city drenched in grief, drenched in his loss. Lucas Prescott, a quiet, hard-working mechanic with a family he adored, was a man who embodied dignity. For years he'd lived a modest life in the heart of Seattle, where every dollar he earned went toward his wife's medical bills and ensuring his son, Jamie, had a brighter future. But one cruel twist of fate robbed him of everything: his family, his freedom, and his hope. A life stolen. It happened on a rainy November night in 2014. Lucas raced home after his shift at the garage to celebrate Jamie's 18th birthday. But as he walked into his cozy one-bedroom apartment, his world crashed. His wife, Susan, lay unconscious on the floor, her face covered in bruises. Standing over her, a man Lucas had never seen. His son Jamie tried to wrestle the intruder off his mother, but there was only so much an 18-year-old could do. Lucas didn't think, he acted. His fists found their mark, landing heavy blows on the intruder's face, chest, and ribs until the man crumpled to the floor. When Lucas reached for his phone to call for help, he barely noticed the blood spilling onto the hardwood. The man was dead. But when the police arrived, the nightmare deepened. The man Lucas had killed wasn't a stranger. He was Frank Radley, the brother of Seattle's most notorious property developer and underground power broker, Victor Radley, a man who knew how to use the law. Victor spun the story into something entirely different. To the courts, Frank wasn't an armed intruder. He was visiting the Prescott family to discuss a minor business matter when Lucas violently attacked him in a fit of paranoid rage. The evidence? Frank's gun was gone, removed before the authorities arrived, replaced with forged documents about a fabricated eviction dispute. Lucas was painted as a brutal killer, an unhinged man who refused to leave the shabby apartment Victor Radley had been trying to reclaim through legal channels. By the time the trial concluded, Lucas was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 15 years behind bars. His appeals fell apart thanks to Victor's political clout and wealth. What hurt the most wasn't just the injustice, it was what came after. The breaking point. While Lucas rotted in a damp prison cell, his wife Susan succumbed to her injuries. Without Lucas or Susan to care for him, Jamie spiraled into depression, barely keeping himself afloat by working grueling overnight shifts to pay off the debts Victor relentlessly hounded him for, the same debts Lucas had never owed. By the time Lucas was exonerated in 2019 on a technical reversal, a decade before his sentence was due to end, it was too late for any kind of reunion. Susan was dead. Jamie was missing, dropped off the face of the earth, and every connection to the life Lucas had held dear had been obliterated. He left prison a broken man, with nothing to lose but the fire of vengeance that clung stubbornly to his mind. The plan takes shape. It began simply, quietly. The Lucas who walked out of McNeil Island Correctional Center wasn't the same man who went in. His once soft face was hard-edged now, his hands steady and unshaking. He didn't rant, didn't shout, didn't seek sympathy from the few old friends who occasionally pitied his plight, but he'd made a decision. Someone had taken everything from him. Radley had destroyed his family, his name, and his place in the world. And Lucas? Lucas would repay that debt with blood. He spent months gathering intelligence. Moving through Seattle's rain-drenched back streets, Lucas pieced together the empire Victor Radley had built. He didn't just own properties. He controlled underground casinos, corrupt government officials, and loan sharks with long lists of missing victims. Lucas didn't move recklessly. This wasn't about rushing out in a blaze of glory. It was going to be slow, systematic destruction. "I'll take it all apart," Lucas murmured to himself in the solitude of his rented room. His voice was sharp, focused, piece by piece. The first strike. Victor Radley's organization was expansive, but no empire stands without its pillars. And Lucas began with those pillars. His first target was Rodney the Hammer Garrison, a loan shark infamous for coercing struggling families into giving up everything they owned. He was also the man who'd ferried false witnesses to testify against Lucas in court years earlier. Lucas followed Rodney for weeks, observing his patterns. A man like Rodney always felt like he was untouchable. That arrogance made him predictable. One cold night, Lucas watched Rodney leave one of Radley's underground gambling dens. Quiet, like a shadow in the rain, Lucas pounced. Rodney didn't survive the encounter. Days later, his battered body was discovered behind a shipping yard in Tacoma, with a note stuffed into his open mouth, "Blood for blood." Seattle's criminal underworld buzzed with fear, and it was only the beginning. A city in fear. One by one, Lucas dismantled Victor's network. A corrupt cop suddenly vanished, later found tied to a canal lock with threatening words carved into the palm of his hand. An underground casino, a cornerstone of Victor's income, mysteriously burned to the ground, its safe cleaned out. Reports of a hooded man seen lurking outside properties tied to Radley surfaced daily in whispers. Victor himself grew restless. He had ruled Seattle's dark side for years, but this was surgical. This wasn't the work of a petty rival looking for territory. It was personal, and it was pulling apart the very foundation of his empire. But Victor didn't know who was behind the attacks. Not yet. The confrontation. By the spring of 2020, Lucas had finally reached Radley's doorstep, or rather his towering estate west of the city. Victor's security was infamous. Armed guards patrolling the gates, high-end surveillance systems, even pressure-sensitive perimeter alarms, but none of it could stop Lucas. On a rainy night in April, Lucas slipped past the guards like a ghost. Victor was in his study, surrounded by the trappings of luxury that had shielded him from the consequences of his crimes. Lucas didn't announce himself when he entered. He didn't want vengeance to be loud or chaotic. He wanted it to be clear. Victor froze in his chair when he saw the figure standing at the edge of the room, dripping rainwater onto his Persian rug. "You destroyed my life," Lucas said simply. Victor stammered. "You have no idea what you've started." But Lucas didn't flinch. He'd heard enough of Victor Radley's excuses, his half-smirking justifications. For the first time in his life, Victor wasn't behind lawyers or police. He was at the mercy of a man who had learned to live without fear. What happened next? That depends on who tells the story. Some say Lucas spared Victor, opting instead to leave him broken and penniless, a public confession forcing his empire to unravel. Others whisper that Lucas ended it in the study without hesitation, making Victor the last brick to crumble in a toppled tower of corruption, a legacy of justice. By autumn 2020, Victor Radley's organization was gone. The man who had once terrorized Seattle through wealth and intimidation had become nothing more than a ghost story. As for Lucas, he vanished. Some say he fled north, settling quietly in a snowy Alaskan town to live out his remaining years in peace. Others believe he stayed in Seattle, quietly watching, ensuring that no other power broker rose to fill Victor's void. The legend of Lucas Prescott became deeply embedded in Seattle's consciousness, a tale of revenge that blurred the lines between justice and destruction. And, in the rain-soaked streets of the city, his whispered name remains synonymous with one lesson: take everything from a man, and he'll stop at nothing to take it all back. The secret pit in the Arizona desert. Arizona's vast desert stretches like an endless mirage under the relentless sun, red rock towers, canyons, and sandy plains as far as the eye can see. To most, it's a place of stark beauty, a wilderness that feels untouched by time, but hidden under the scorched earth lies a darker truth. In the fall of 2008, rumors began to swirl about a series of mysterious disappearances along the border near southern Arizona. Migrants, travelers, and even locals were vanishing without a trace. What started as a collection of whispered stories soon led to the discovery of something that would change the area forever: a secret pit, deep in the desert, filled with bodies. A string of disappearances. The first cases went mostly unnoticed. Arizona is no stranger to danger. Set against the backdrop of border crossings, human traffickers, and the harsh realities of the desert, many who disappeared were assumed to have succumbed to the elements or to foul play by cartels. But by mid-2008, the stories became too frequent and strange to ignore. A long-haul trucker went missing after pulling over near mile marker 322 on I-19. A local rancher's son vanished while riding his ATV near the Nogales border. Entire groups of migrants led by coyotes were never seen again. Even workers at a gas station off Highway 286 reported seeing people walking into the desert, never to come back. Sheriff Tom Greaves of Santa Cruz County initially wrote it all off as unrelated tragedies. "The desert's a tough place," he told reporters back then. "Out here you run out of water, get turned around, or cross paths with the wrong person. Well, it chews people up." But as the numbers grew, the explanations fell apart. The discovery. On October 16, 2008, a group of amateur hikers stumbled across what they thought was an abandoned mine shaft in the middle of the Altar Valley, miles away from any major road. One of the hikers, a geology student, noticed something odd about the shaft. It wasn't marked like old mines usually are, and there were no signs of mining equipment or supports. Curiosity got the better of them, and they lowered themselves partway down using rope and flashlights. Halfway into the narrow shaft, one of the hikers screamed. The bottom wasn't empty. It was filled with bodies. The group fled back to town and reported their find to the sheriff's department. By the end of the day, the site had been cordoned off, crawling with law enforcement and forensic investigators. What they uncovered horrified even the toughest of them. The pit was almost 100 feet deep and held at least 30 corpses, though the number was difficult to confirm due to the state of decomposition. Many of the bodies bore signs of violence: fractured skulls, gunshot wounds, bound wrists. Some were wearing modern clothes, while others were barely dressed, stripped of identification or belongings. Sheriff Greaves, who'd seen his share of gruesome borderland crime scenes, was visibly shaken. "This isn't just murder," he told reporters, his voice heavy with disbelief. "This is something else, something bigger." A grim theory emerges. At first, investigators thought the pit might have been a cartel dumping ground. The borderland deserts have long been battlegrounds for drug and human trafficking, and mass graves aren't unheard of in cartel territory. But something about the scene didn't sit right. For one, the bodies weren't buried. A cartel would have taken the time to hide their actions. Instead, the victims were dumped, almost carelessly, into the pit. And then, there was the placement of the shaft itself. The pit was miles from any known smuggling route. It wasn't near the cartel-controlled corridors, nor was it in an area frequented by migrants. And even stranger, many of the victims found weren't undocumented migrants or drug runners, they were American citizens. A missing woman from Tucson was identified among the dead, her hands still tied with old electrical wire. Another victim was a truck driver with no known ties to the border trade but had been reported missing months earlier near Nogales. Why were these people here? And who put them in the pit? An unraveling scheme. As more bodies were identified, a chilling link began to emerge. Several of the victims had vanished after last being seen with coyotes, smugglers paid to guide migrants across the U.S.-Mexico border. But these weren't just coyotes, they were connected to a shadowy network operated by a man none dared to speak of, Miguel El Cuervo Suarez. El Cuervo, the Raven, was infamous among law enforcement as a ghost-like figure. He wasn't just a human trafficker, he ran a human exploitation operation. For years, he had been abducting migrants and travelers who couldn't pay their smugglers' fees, selling them into forced labor or worse. Those who resisted or became liabilities, they were eliminated. The pit, investigators theorized, was where the unusable were dumped. They were killed and discarded like trash, not even given the dignity of a shallow grave. But Suarez's victims weren't just migrants. Occasionally, locals and travelers who had seen too much or interfered with his operations were added to the body count. He had created a system so brutal, so inhumane, that even seasoned agents had trouble comprehending its scale. The hunt for El Cuervo. With the pit exposed, Suarez and his network of smugglers went underground, but the find lit a fire under federal and state authorities. A joint task force was formed, led by the FBI and Border Patrol, and an aggressive manhunt began. Detective Carla Velasquez, a rising star in Arizona's State Public Safety Department, became the face of the investigation. She was determined to bring Suarez to justice. "This man made the desert his hunting ground," she said during one high-profile press conference. "But now, we're hunting him." What they uncovered was even darker. Suarez's organization didn't just stop at smuggling. It was deeply tied to human trafficking rings that stretched across the border and into the United States. The Arizona pit, now referred to as La Fosa de Cuervo, the Raven's Pit, was just the beginning. Similar dumping grounds were rumored to exist in Texas, New Mexico, and Mexico itself. But Suarez himself remained a shadow, slipping past authorities time and time again. A deadly confrontation. In February 2009, a break came. An informant, a former enforcer for Suarez's gang, led authorities to an abandoned ranch near the desert's edge, where Suarez was reportedly hiding. The ensuing raid was explosive. Armed smugglers opened fire on federal agents and the quiet desert erupted into chaos. Suarez, true to his reputation, attempted to escape through an underground tunnel built beneath the ranch. But Velasquez and her team anticipated the move and intercepted him at the tunnel's exit. The standoff was brief. Suarez, cornered with nowhere else to run, pulled a weapon and was shot dead. The man who had terrorized the borderland for years was finally taken down, but not without a cost. 2 federal agents lost their lives in the raid. The pit's legacy. The pit in Arizona became an enduring symbol of the horrors hidden within the vastness of the desert. In total, 43 bodies were ultimately removed, though many of the victims were never identified. It became a stark reminder of the brutality suffered by the vulnerable and forgotten. For years after, activists and lawmakers cited La Fosa de Cuervo as a call to arms for better border protections, not just to stop traffickers, but to protect those preyed upon by the system. Detective Velasquez, now a household name, published a memoir detailing the case and the fight to take down Suarez. But even she admitted that many questions still lingered. Were there more pits? More people complicit in Suarez's crimes? And how many had simply disappeared, their stories swallowed by the unforgiving desert? Echoes in the desert more than a decade later, hikers and wanderers still avoid the area around the pit. Locals say it's cursed. On windy nights they claim you can hear whispers drifting over the sands, cries for help gone unanswered. Shockwaves in Hollywood. Was the killer a famous star? Hollywood, a glittering city of stars where fantasy is made and secrets are buried deep beneath the gilded surface. For decades, the lavish lifestyles of its elite have captivated the world, painting a picture of luxury, fame, and talent. But beneath the lights of the red carpet and behind mansion gates, scandals brew, egos clash, and rivalries simmer. It was only a matter of time before the tension spilled over into something darker, something deadly. In the summer of 2019, the film industry, and the world with it, was upended by a shocking crime that played out like the twisted script of a psychological thriller. Selena Graves, a famed actress beloved for her roles in both indie darlings and box-office blockbusters, was found dead in her opulent Beverly Hills estate. Murder had come to Hollywood, but the real scandal wasn't just her untimely death. It was the growing suspicion that her murderer might be from within Hollywood's glittering circle of stars. A starlet's final night. Selena Graves was at the height of her career. At only 34 years old, she was already an Academy Award winner who had graced every major magazine cover in the U.S. Critics hailed her as the face of modern-day cinema, and audiences adored her youth, beauty, and raw talent. But Selena wasn't just a rising star. She was calculating, intelligent, and fiercely ambitious. Many in the industry envied her meteoric rise, while others quietly accused her of stepping on anyone who got in her way. On the night of July 15, 2019, Selena hosted an intimate party at her Beverly Hills mansion. The occasion, to celebrate wrapping her latest thriller, Whispers Beyond the Glass, a psychological drama that many critics already predicted would sweep the next awards season. The guest list was exclusive, just 20 close friends, industry elites, and crew members from the film. Among those who attended were her co-star and rumored rival, Alexandra Reese, celebrated director Max Carter, her ex-boyfriend and singer-songwriter Ryan Blake, and studio head William Bill Hastings, a Hollywood insider whose connections ran as deep as his bank account. By all accounts, the party was a dazzling affair. Champagne flowed freely, laughter echoed through the halls, and glowing photos of Selena laughing with her guests surfaced on Instagram that evening. But somewhere between midnight and dawn, glamour turned to horror. The gruesome discovery. At 6 a.m. the next morning, Selena's housekeeper arrived at the estate to begin her daily routine. Instead of the messy aftermath of a party, she found something far worse. Selena's lifeless body was sprawled on the floor of her home office, her head resting in a pool of blood. She had been struck by a heavy object, later identified as one of the golden bookends from her desk. Blood streaks across the floor suggested a struggle, yet nothing in the room appeared stolen or out of place. Even more chilling was what sat propped on the desk nearby, Selena's shattered Oscar statue, its broken base smeared with blood. Was it a symbol? A taunt? Another clue deliberately left behind by the killer? The housekeeper's shrill scream summoned the police, and within hours, the once-celebrated mansion had turned into a chaotic crime scene swarming with detectives, reporters, and helicopters circling above. Suspects in the spotlight. The investigation quickly revealed that the glamorous gathering at Selena's home was anything but harmonious. Behind the warm smiles and staged group photos, tension had simmered beneath the surface. Detectives honed in on several potential suspects, each of whom had both motive and opportunity to want Selena gone. 1. Alexandra Reese, Selena's stunning blonde co-star, had been vying for the same leading roles for years. Hollywood insiders whispered about the behind-the-scenes tensions between the two on the set of. Some described their relationship as frenemy-like at best, cutthroat at worst. Witnesses claimed Selena and Alexandra had argued loudly during the party, with Alexandra storming off to one of the upstairs bathrooms shortly before midnight. 2. Selena's former boyfriend, pop sensation Ryan Blake, had dated the actress for 3 tumultuous years before an explosive breakup 6 months prior. According to friends, Ryan's romantic obsession with Selena hadn't waned, and he had made several attempts to win her back. He was seen leaving the party unusually early, but security cameras didn't pick up where he went afterward. 3. Max Carter, the brilliant yet brooding director of Selena's latest film, was known for his intense relationships with his leading ladies. Rumors swirled that he had become infatuated with Selena during filming only to have her shut him down. Could jealousy and rejection have led him to lose control? 4. As an industry titan, Bill Hastings stood to lose millions if Selena disrupted her upcoming promotional work for. In the weeks leading up to her death, sources claimed Selena had been privately negotiating a contract dispute. Was Bill capable of murder to protect his bottom line? A glitzy investigation. As the media descended on the case, every step of the investigation played out like a macabre reality show. Paparazzi camped outside celebrities' homes while conspiracy theories from fans spread like wildfire across social media. #Who Killed Selena trended for weeks, with the public obsessed by every new revelation. Detective Laura Bennett, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving high-profile cases, was assigned to unravel the mystery. "Hollywood cases are tricky," she admitted during a rare press statement. "What looks obvious on the surface is often an illusion. Everyone here is acting, even off camera." What intrigued Bennett most was the crime's symbolism. The weapon, the Oscar, felt deeply personal, almost theatrical. It wasn't the choice of someone looking to make a quick kill and escape unnoticed. This act screamed of hatred, jealousy, and long-known grievances. A major break. The investigation took a dramatic turn when forensic specialists identified traces of Alexandra Reese's DNA on Selena's shattered Oscar statue. Shortly after, security footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera revealed Alexandra leaving Selena's mansion just after 1 a.m., visibly flustered as she climbed into a black Escalade. When confronted with the evidence, Alexandra cracked, but her confession left Hollywood stunned. "Yes, I was in the office that night," she admitted to Detective Bennett, tears running down her face. "We argued. She told me she'd make sure I'd never work on a major film again. Do you know what it's like to watch someone take every role, every opportunity you've ever wanted?" However, Alexandra adamantly denied killing Selena. "I left the office after she threatened me. She was alive when I walked out. Someone else must have gone in after me." A twisted revelation. The case reached its shocking climax when a surprising suspect emerged, Ryan Blake. The increasingly erratic singer had been stalking Selena for weeks, using private investigators to dig into her life. Detectives discovered text messages from Selena to her legal team that revealed her growing fear of Ryan. "He's unstable," one message read. "He can't let go, and I don't know what he'll do." Following the party, Ryan had broken into Selena's home after Alexandra's heated argument, intending to confront her about their breakup. But when rejected once again, his rage boiled over, leading to the attack with the Oscar statue. The aftermath. Ryan was arrested and later convicted of second-degree murder. At his sentencing, he broke down in tears, claiming, "I loved her. I just wanted her to forgive me." Selena's death left an indelible mark on Hollywood. Her final film, Whispers Beyond the Glass, became an eerie posthumous phenomenon, receiving critical acclaim as fans mourned the actress, whose career had been cut tragically short. But the mystery surrounding her death also revealed the darkness lurking behind Hollywood's bright lights, rivalries, obsessions, and the fragile egos of those at the top of their game. Detective Bennett summed it up best. Hollywood loves a story of ambition, betrayal, and tragedy. But in this case, the horror wasn't on the screen. It was all too real. Hollywood's Black Mirror. To this day, Selena's mansion stands eerily quiet on Sunset Boulevard, its windows covered in dust and its gates locked tight. Tourists occasionally stop by to take photos, hoping to catch a glimpse of its macabre history. Some say you can still hear faint echoes of her laughter on moonlit nights. The killer who escaped from Alcatraz, Alcatraz. To the average American, the very name conjures images of cold steel bars, gray stone walls, and the icy waters of the San Francisco Bay. Built as an impenetrable fortress to house the nation's most dangerous criminals, it was said to be escape-proof, a rock surrounded by water and despair. But one fateful night in 1943, that legend crumbled. The impossible happened. A killer slipped the noose of Alcatraz, and for decades, his escape would haunt the corridors of justice, like a ghost no one could catch. The monster behind bars. Francis Red Malone wasn't just another criminal filling the cells of Alcatraz, he was infamous. A hulking figure with fiery red hair and piercing green eyes, Red Malone made headlines throughout the late 1930s for a string of brutal murders that spread terror through Southern California. Dubbed the Angel of Death by the press, Malone's calling card was his distinctive brutality. He always left his victims with a single red feather pinned to their clothing as a macabre signature. In 1939, after a harrowing 2-month manhunt spanning 3 states, Malone was finally captured by federal marshals outside Reno, Nevada. He was tried, convicted, and shipped off to Alcatraz, the ultimate prison for America's most irredeemable captives. Known for his violent temper and ability to manipulate those around him, Malone quickly earned a reputation as one of Alcatraz's most dangerous inmates. Warden James Albright claimed, "If ever there's a man who belongs on the rock, it's Malone. He doesn't just kill, he enjoys it, he breathes it." And so Alcatraz became his cage. For 4 long years it seemed to do its job. Red Malone rotted behind the island's fortified walls, stewing in anger and resentment, but seemingly subdued. The guards never suspected that behind the mask of submission, the monster was scheming, the night of the escape. On the cold, fog-filled evening of October 3, 1943, Alcatraz's impenetrable reputation was shattered. The details of how it happened remain a blend of fact, speculation, and myth. According to official records, Red Malone exploited a rare storm-induced blackout that plunged the island into darkness. Prisoners were confined early as winds howled across the bay, and the guards huddled inside, seeking shelter from the rain that lashed the prison walls. But Malone wasn't in his cell when roll call came the following morning. Authorities believe he had been planning his escape for months, using the cover of the storm as the final step in his plan. Reports suggest Malone had secretly fashioned a crude raft from stolen raincoats, pieces of cloth and rubber scraps pilfered from the prison workshop. And from the evidence left behind, it appeared Malone crawled through narrow ventilation ducts, navigated a maze of service tunnels, and finally emerged through a utility hatch leading to the fog-covered shoreline. No inmate had ever attempted such a daring escape, let alone successfully. But Malone wasn't an ordinary inmate. A trail of blood. For 2 days, officials assumed Malone had drowned, swallowed by the freezing, choppy waters of San Francisco Bay like so many who had tried to swim the treacherous distance to the mainland. There were no confirmed sightings, no tangible leads, just the brutal silence of unanswered questions. But on October 7th, a report came in from a wooded area outside Sausalito, roughly 12 miles from Alcatraz. A young couple walking their dog stumbled across a horrifying scene. A drifter slumped against a tree, his throat slashed. Tucked into the man's weathered jacket was a red feather. Panic spread like wildfire. News of Red Malone's escape leaked to the press, despite Alcatraz officials' desperate attempts to keep the incident under wraps. "Killer loose on the mainland," roared one San Francisco Chronicle headline. The city was thrust into a state of collective terror. The hunt begins. Every able-bodied police officer, deputy, federal agent, and boat patrol in Northern California was called into action. Checkpoints sprang up on highways, and legal curfews were imposed across towns near the bay. Citizens armed themselves, scanning shadows nervously as word spread that Malone wasn't just on the loose, he was hunting again. In the days that followed, more bodies appeared: a gas station attendant in Vallejo, a retired dock worker in Martinez, a shopkeeper in Richmond. Each victim was found with a bloodied red feather pinned to their clothing, a cruel mockery from a killer who clearly reveled in taunting his pursuers. The federal response. By mid-October, the case had captured the attention of J. Edgar Hoover himself, and the FBI took control of the manhunt. The Bureau's top profiler, Agent Leonard Brooks, was flown in from Washington, D.C. to assist the investigation. "Malone doesn't kill to hide or cover his tracks," Brooks told a room of tense law enforcement officials. "He kills because it's his way of saying, 'I'm better than you. You can't catch me.'" Perhaps Malone's biggest weapon was the uncertainty he created. Despite his hulking frame, he slipped in and out of towns like a ghost. Locals began spreading rumors that he disguised himself, even shaving his red hair to blend in, transforming from the wild-eyed killer they feared into just another face in a crowd. But Brooks saw through the facade. "He wants attention," the profiler insisted. "He wants us to stay up at night, scared. The moment that spotlight dims, the moment we stop chasing, he'll be right back in plain sight." The final showdown? On Halloween night in 1943, nearly a month after Malone's escape, federal marshals received an anonymous tip that the fugitive had been spotted hiding in an abandoned winery outside Napa Valley. Armed to the teeth, a strike team surrounded the property at dusk, praying this would finally end the nightmare. What followed was a chaotic firefight, as a figure matching Red Malone's description burst from the winery cellar and opened fire. The flames of lanterns lit the darkness while the roar of gunfire echoed through the vines. By the time the melee ended, multiple officers were injured, and the building was engulfed in flames. Inside the rubble, charred remains were found, a body too burned for immediate identification. Authorities declared Malone dead, and the nation breathed a sigh of relief. The legend of Red Malone seemed finally over. But was it? The legacy of fear? In the years that followed, whispers persisted that Malone wasn't truly gone. There were no dental records, no verifiable proof tying the body from the winery to the escaped convict. Meanwhile, sporadic killings bearing his eerie signature continued to occur. Red feathers found at crime scenes from Oregon to Nevada, even as far south as Arizona. Some believe Malone survived that Halloween night and lived on under a new identity, his bloodlust unchecked. Others argue copycats emerged, inspired by the legend of the escape artist with a taste for murder. Whatever the truth may be, Alcatraz's escape-proof reputation was forever tarnished. And Red Malone's story serves as a chilling reminder: some monsters can't be caged. The Rock's ghost. Even decades later, the specter of Red Malone haunts Alcatraz. Visitors to the now-defunct prison-turned-tourist attraction report feeling an eerie presence in Cell Block D, where Malone was once held in solitary confinement. Rangers speak of unexplained cold drafts and distant whispers in the night. For the city of San Francisco, Malone's escape is part of its dark lore, a tale of terror under the shadow of the Golden Gate Bridge, and for the families of his victims, it's a wound left open, a crime story whose last chapter may never truly be written. As one retired Alcatraz guard once put it, staring out over the restless bay waters, "The Rock held a lot of men, but not Malone. That bastard didn't just break out of here, he broke into our nightmares." Conclusion. These cases not only leave behind pain for the victims but also serve as profound lessons about human nature, the impact of greed, hatred, and mental instability. With the relentless efforts of investigative forces,